All right. Yep. We are live. Just give it 2 more seconds. I just want to make sure it's good. All right, that should be good. Yeah. Hey everybody. We're live. Big news today with the IDF taking out Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza. And of course I'm here with Andy. Jason Lyons isn't here. He's got a real job and real responsibilities, unlike us.
Hey, thanks the
Oh,
implicit comment there.
no problem. Yeah, so some wild news. It seems like it wasn't even a targeted attack. It seems like it was just got lucky and got the right guy, which is great.
Yeah, it's a really interesting story actually, D, because the guys who killed, it's essentially a fire team. The soldiers who killed Yahya Sinwar were conventional soldiers. They were a fire team. About four of them had gone into a building, and they hadn't even expected it to fully clear it. I mean, they went in clearing mode, but the building had been mostly demolished by an airstrike. It was Wednesday Israeli time. And the interesting thing is, as I said, these soldiers are conventional. Not only that, but they're from a school. They're
Oh
part
wow.
of they're part of the IDF's Infantry Commanders and Combat Training School. And my apologies to Israeli listeners for butchering the Hebrew here, but they're called the Bislamach Brigade. Bislamach is a Hebrew acronym of the Infantry and Commanders Training School. So when they go to war, when Israel goes to war, they activate the Bismarck Brigade. They empty all of these instructors out. And I mean, that's quite a concept, right? Can you imagine that happening in the United States? We don't, because we've got such a massive military. We can maintain our training structure all the way through. But I know the Ukrainians had a lot of problems because they lost all of their training cadre at the beginning of the war, and it took them a long time to rebuild them. And the Israelis make no pretense. They know normally until this war, the wars are going to be um, short and hopefully decisive. And so all hands go to the pump. Manpower is the big thing. And so these guys went in. They've been in the Bismarck Brigade has been in Khan Yunis, where this happened on and off since March. They replaced the paratroop brigade from the 98th Division, and they've most of the time it's been relatively quiet. Just the pattern, maybe contact every few days, but nothing really significant until now. And it was just extraordinary that the most sophisticated, arguably the most sophisticated intelligence assassination machine in the world scores one of its greatest victories purely by almost by chance, inadvertently. And it's I think, remember our conversation last time about the balance between conventional and soft, and
Yeah.
how the Israelis have had to rely heavily on soft. But this is just a reminder that the ordinary ground pounder plays a very important role in common war. Yes, by chance, but nevertheless, it was doing what they do. Um, so they also found apparently large amounts of Israeli cash and identifying documents on the bodies. They thought at first they might have killed, if they're thinking, what is he doing here by himself? He wasn't around other, there were three others in the room. Three others were killed. No, I'm sorry, two others. And they were apparently his bodyguards,
Mhm.
one of which was a teacher for UNRWA, by the way, which is
Oh wow.
yeah. Um, so in the initial IDF announcement, they said that we killed him unintentionally. They don't mean they didn't need to kill him. They mean that it wasn't, it was pure chance without prior intelligence. Um, and we don't know exactly where this occurred, but we do know it's in Khan Yunis, and that's in the Bismarck's training area. Uh, so who is Sinwar? All right, and what happens now? Um, Sinwar, Yahya Sinwar, who has a misleadingly kind of playful name, was he was arguably the most hardline of the hardline Hamas leaders. Even Hania even Hania at one point seemed, well, Hania was a moderate by comparison. Even Hania mentioned the possibility of a two-state solution one time way back in 2017. Probably, he regretted
Which
it. But the
feels
point
like,
is,
yeah, it probably
you,
feels like a
yeah,
lifetime ago.
you would never have got that out of Sinwar's mouth. He was an uncompromising strategist, and that's a key point. And this is not eulogizing a terrorist, but he was a masterful strategist, and I'll explain a little bit why he was. He combined. I mean, he had a sharp intellect, but he wasn't an orator. He sounded like a thug, I'm told, when he spoke in Arabic, which he was essentially a thug. But it would be misleading to just call him a thug and dismiss him, because you have to look at the preparation and what he built Hamas into. And it was arguably among the five Hamas leaders, not arguably, he had the most credibility. He was recognized as being head of the organization, perhaps even before he was elected head of the organization in Hamas back in 2017, just by sheer force of character. He spent 22 years in Israeli prisons. And during that time, he studied his enemy. He enrolled in Open University, and I'm laughing a little bit here, but when we talk about know your enemy, that's what he did. That's what he used his time in prison to do. He not only learned Hebrew, he learned about Jewish religion. He learned about the statecraft of Israel, the basis on which it was set up. He learned his his interest in learning about his adversary went way beyond military capabilities. And I think among all Hamas leaders, perhaps he had the best understanding of his enemy. He spoke fluent Hebrew. In fact, one of the Shin Bet interrogators said that his Hebrew was actually better than his jailers. I mean, it was
Oh,
more,
wow.
yeah, it was more educated. I mean, the jailers probably spoke as though they're from, the Israeli version of Brooklyn.
I knew it was coming.
Yeah, whereas he
Probably
was,
right.
yeah, he'd at least he'd at least um, study the grammar.
Yeah, he
Um,
enunciated.
yeah, yeah. So his real name, not that anyone really cares at this time, was Abu Ibrahim, which is far more forgettable than Yahya Sinwar. And it's important to know where he came from, right? He's actually same age. He's a year older than me. He was born in Khan Yunis, which at the time back then was a hotbed of Muslim Brotherhood activity. This was during the 70s and 80s. You don't really think about the Muslim Brotherhood having a hold in Gaza, but it certainly did in that part of Gaza, particularly in those years. And so he was in the Muslim Brotherhood. He was a prominent activist, um, and just one point about the Muslim Brotherhood. Again, not a defense of the Muslim Brotherhood, but you've got to understand the appeal that an organization like that has, and the squalor and deprivation of a refugee camp, right? I mean, it offers, when you've got massive unemployment and everything. The Brotherhood offered an unequivocal message of insurrection, as kind of divine destiny, right? The backing of God. And that is what separated them and then Hamas from secular organizations like Fatah. And that appeal, the religious appeal, really caught on among young Palestinians. It gave them pride, direction, and self-respect in the refugee camp. And it gave them something other than subsisting off UN handouts. And it's interesting that was a social, just like Hezbollah and later Hamas, there was a kind of a social welfare aspect of the Brotherhood, as far as kind of unofficial unemployment, neighborhood watch, neighborhood support. Okay, I'm saying that because it's important to know the appeal that these organizations have and why they have such an appeal. And I would argue, or I don't really need to argue, I think it's pretty that even, you know, guys like you and me, just and Jason, growing up in an environment, may well have fallen into that. You know, I mean, we
Yeah.
certainly, I mean, why not? I mean, we're all type A. I hate that term, but we're all activists, right? At heart, all of us, we want to change things. Um, and so you you can imagine why, you can see why the Brotherhoods had such an appeal. Um, and then so there was a guy in the Muslim Brotherhood back then called Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, and Sinwar was smart enough to get in fairly tightly with him. He gained his confidence, and yeah, as a Brotherhood loyalist, and that really helped him subsequently. It kind of gave him a halo effect because Yassin headed up Hamas when it was founded in 1987. Remember, Hamas was formed just as the first Intifada was kicking off, and when Yassin formed Hamas, Sinwar formed a group called Al Majid. He was only 25 at the time, and that Al Majid became infamous for punishing basically anyone who committed any kind of infraction. Morality offenses were what Sinwar started with, you know, targeting shops that sold sex videos and hunting down and killing anyone suspected of collaborating with Israel. And there's more to that later. Sinwar um, became, he had a penchant for killing with his own hands, you know, for killing at close quarters, and he liked to brag about it. And even in, you know, even his Shin Bet interrogators say that came out, you know, rather than confession. It was almost like he was proud of it. You know, for instance, he confessed to punishing a suspected informer by getting the man's brother to bury him alive, finishing the job using a spoon instead of a spade. You know, and he strangled people personally. I mean, not the sort of guy that you want to bring home for tea, but at the same time, he had this curious charisma. He drew people to him. You know, you know these people. I mean, the playground bully, the the guy who everyone is afraid of, right? But there's some part of him they want to be him too, because he just didn't seem to be afraid of anything. And he showed, you know, his interrogators said he showed no emotion, you know, and he probably, I think he knew he was going to die anyway. I mean, there was just basically no way out for him. I think he was quite philosophical about it. I mean, he made and forgive me if I'm misquoting this, but he quoted Hussein Ali saying just a few months ago. He said there are only 2 days, or when 2 days. There are 2 days where you need to. Oh, 2 days. He's talking about death. I'm sorry. There's 2 days when you come into contact with your destiny. If it is not your time to die, then you have nothing to fear. And basically, if it is your time to die, nothing that you do will save that. So he was kind of I mean, he was a fatalist in that sense. But he so anyway, he in 1988 he goes to jail for killing two Israeli soldiers, for planning the abduction and killing of two Israeli soldiers, and then he was arrested again and he's convicted again for the murder of 12 Palestinians, and given 4 life sentences, right? And this is the beginning of his 22 years in prison. But what is strange about this is, far from removing him from relevance, his time there, which, you know, some of it was in solitary confinement, and all of which was, you know, was spent studying. it really cemented his position within the organization. Um, and and there are those who argue that when he was released from prison in 2011, he was already kind of the de facto leader of Hamas. And how did he do that from prison? Well, you've seen the movies, right? I mean, he imposed his authority pretty ruthlessly, punished informers. He positioned himself as a leader among the prisoners, and negotiating on their behalf with the with the Israelis, um, and basically enforcing discipline among the inmates. Um, the the guys who are interrogating him, the Shin Bet, there's a guy named Michael Kubi who has spoken about him, about Sinwar, and because he of all Israelis, there's probably one or two who know him well. One was a journalist who covered Sinwar. I can't remember the guy's name, but Kubi was a Shin Bet agent. Spent about 150 hours questioning us Sinwar. He's insistent that he used no brutal methods, blah blah blah. But his impression after that time was of someone very brutal, aggressive, and charismatic at the same time. Which is a good description of any bad acting leader, really, when you think about it. I mean, something has to draw people into that dark circle, and it was his force of personality. So when he was released, this is an interesting part. His brother, we're going to get to this, his brother Mohammed was involved in the abduction of an Israeli soldier, Gilad Shalit, and it was he was captured it was after a 2006 cross-border raid, cross-border by Hamas into Israel, and was held by Hamas in Gaza for 5 years. So Mohammed was behind that, and the Israelis, by the way, have tried to kill him 6 times. I mean, this was a huge humiliation for the Israelis, because they exchanged 1,000 prisoners to include Sinwar, Mohammed's brother, right, as part of this deal. 1,000 prisoners. Now, there are those who say that was a very bad precedent, because it gave groups like Hamas a goal for taking hostages and in terms for exchange, because they thought the message that they received was that they could bargain one Israeli life for 1,000 people. So you think, fast forward, that was Sinwar's message. That's how he was released from jail. What do you think his goal is going to be when he plans an operation himself? Of course, it's going to involve hostages, because that's because of the Israeli psyche, not a criticism. It's a very understandable psyche, and it's not shared by our government, right?
Yeah.
For getting, but that's partly why this whole this whole affair of the hostages of the last year, there's been such a sense of betrayal against the government, because many feel that this is not in the ethos of the state of Israel, to allow these people just to languish. I'm not saying that's what the government did, but that's the impression. For us as Americans, it's easy to mirror image and say, yeah, well, of course you don't negotiate, but the Israelis are very, very hardcore in a lot of things, but when it comes to getting their people back, it's central to their to their ethos. So yeah, anyway, when Sinwar comes out of jail, he doesn't finish his Open University degree, by the way, but his jailers think that wasn't his intent. His intent was to learn rather than to get qualifications. He comes out of jail and he goes right into the enforcing position. In 2015, he kills a guy named Mahmoud Ishtui. Forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it, okay? And initially for embezzlement, but then for homosexuality, as rumors of this guy being involved in gay sex come out. Now, it was an unpleasant, the way they punished him is he was in, they basically imprisoned him on and off, tortured him for a year before finally killing him. And then 2017, that's when Sinwar becomes the elected leader of Hamas in Gaza. But by then, he'd long been considered Hamas's de facto leader, even if, because all the group's political operatives were based in Doha, they held higher official leadership positions. But Sinwar was the guy in the arena, right? And just by dint of personality, he's a very different personality than the political leadership in Qatar, right? You think
for
about,
sure.
we'll talk a little bit. Hania was, as I mentioned, a relative moderate, and we'll talk about Khaled Mashal, who's the guy who may well replace Sinwar. And no one challenged his rule. Ismail Hania, head of Hamas's political bureau, was the nominal leader of the organization, but he deferred all operational decision making to Sinwar. And in fact, when it came to 7 October attacks, there are those who say that even Hania didn't know about all the plans, because Sinwar was very, very good at operational security. A little bit more on that. So in 2017, all right, that's 6 years before the attacks on 7 October. That is when Sinwar started to develop this plan. And, as I mentioned, he was a strategist, and he realized that the cycle of rocket attacks and reprisals that, against the Israelis, it kept the pot boiling, but they couldn't be an end in itself. They weren't having any type of strategic effect. And as the Israelis their Iron Dome system became more effective, and even the cross-border raids, except for the one with Shalit, achieved little. So he started to hatch a plan to strike Israel, a debilitating blow, one from which it would never recover. And so interestingly enough, in 2021, there was another flare-up in Gaza. I think it was like 14 days long. The usual pattern: several hundred Palestinians killed and a handful of Israelis. Actually, it might have been 2,000 back in 2021. Anyway, the interesting thing about that, it was primarily a exchange of rockets. But the Israelis did go in and conduct limited raids. But it seems now as though that was kind of a test, as him testing the system. He had, and he was low profile during that time, because he wanted the Israelis to think that he was focused on governance of Gaza, right? And the Israelis were offering economic incentives. Sinwar had his life saved by an Israeli surgeon while he was in jail, so maybe the Israelis thought that he, might have developed a soft spot for them. But not the case, So even back in 2014, sorry to jump around a little bit,
No worries.
Sinwar started talking to Hania. We know about this, about enlisting Iran's support for an attack. And so from 2014 onwards, they were getting large amount of money from Iran, some $100 million annually in all the years up to 2023. And that was really Sinwar and Hania's doing. And because the rest of the Hamas leadership, Mashal, were opposed to Iran. Well, not opposed, but they had pissed Iran off because of their opposition or their support for the Sunni revolution against Assad in Syria. So Sinwar is the guy who recognized they needed a state sponsor. All right, and that's significant. Without that, Hamas would be a tin-pot organization. I mean, some might say it still is, but I mean, incapable of launching an attack like it did. And then, all the time, I mean, Sinwar's, despite his gangster appearance and speech, he's fairly sophisticated in the fact that he continues the deception. In 2018, he gives a briefing to the international media. You can look it up online, and he signaled his support for thousands of Palestinians to break through the border fence separating the Gaza Strip from Israel as part of peaceful protests, though. Okay, and then after that, though, he's not foremost in being very bellicose, and the Israelis think that that he's become a pragmatist. And indeed, he appears to be. He supports temporary ceasefires with Israel, prisoner exchanges, and even a reconciliation with the Palestinian Authority, right? Even after they try and kill him in 2018. But all the time, he's getting closer to Iran, and that was quite an achievement in itself. A partnership between a Shia country and a Sunni Arab organization is not an obvious one.
Yeah.
Both share the same goal to end the state of Israel and liberate Jerusalem, and that's what Sinwar hit upon. And of course, it was part of Soleimani's master plan. It was Sinwar who came with the plan. Who started to plan this, the attacks, but he had a deputy who was head of the Al-Qassam brigades, Daif, right, who's also dead now. And Daif may have been the only other guy who knew something about, not the whole plan, because no one knew about that except until right near the end, but certainly a lot of the plan and what they were working for, because starting in 2018, Hamas started to organize exercises, right? Training exercises around Gaza. And it wasn't just Hamas. They brought in PIJ and a couple of the other Palestinian groups. And in those exercises, and you can look this up on, I think there's a good BBC article about it, and YouTube, some interviews with Hamas, from Hamas members. They were practicing things like breaching fences, destroying tanks, and clearing kibbutzes. Okay, so and they built this mock kind of training. It's amazing. They did this under the eyes of the Israelis. They had a training area. It was near the coast in central Gaza, and it was the ground was below. I mean, it was below ground level. So it wasn't clearly, you couldn't clearly see it unless you were right up on it. It was very well chosen, and they conducted extensive drills there. They did at least four major exercises before 7 October. By that I mean, once every few months, right? But in between that, there was a lot of other training taking place. Even hang gliding training, training and operating drones. So all this stuff had to happen under the eyes of the Israelis, all right, to put together what became quite a very sophisticated attack. So you can, credit to him in the sense that, no, credit, but you know what I'm saying. I mean,
Yeah.
Smart guy. Him and Daif putting all this together. And all the time, he's convincing Israel that he cares more about ensuring that workers and that the workers in Gaza had access to jobs across the border and had no interest in starting a new war. So, after the 2021 war, although these flare-ups are hardly wars, in 2021 battle, it's all part of the same war. Israel did seek to provide a basic level of economic stability in Gaza, and they offered incentives for thousands of permits for Gazans to go to work in Israel and the West Bank. That was 2021, and then gradually over the last couple of years, 2022, 23, they've started to replace workers from Gaza with workers from Southeast Asia, which may have added to the kind of the angst building, the pressure building within Gaza, because these jobs were disappearing. And interestingly too, after 2021, as part of the subterfuge, Hamas refrained from military operations against Israel. Very interesting. that Sinwar exerted that kind of control. No one dared do anything. And to explain what a big deal that is, it's kind of a rite of passage, right? For a lot of Palestinian youths to appear as to be an activist against what they see as an occupation. But he quelled all of that. It's what the the head of Shin Bet called an unprecedented intelligence tactic to mislead Israel. Okay, maybe making excuses for his own mistakes there, but it was, the subterfuge, the deception plan was a strong one. It has to be said that it's very easy to go back and say, "Oh my God, this was so obvious," but things always seem much more obvious afterwards, and you have to look at it, at the context of the time. But he did say, interestingly, at one point, that he mentioned hostages, and this was like in an internal memo, and I don't know how this was. I don't know when it was released, but anyway, the point is, in it, he talks about the importance of hostage taking to gain bargaining space with the Israelis, and that should be their goal. So there was, although there was this intelligence hopping around, it was very conflicting, and it really did seem on the balance of things that he had become more of a pragmatist since taking over. All right, so what does this mean? Now he's dead. What's much more important?
My question is, I mean, I don't know which one you want to tackle first. It's like, who's going to be the next guy up that's like the on the ground guy in Gaza? Because that guy's got a huge bullseye on his back.
Yeah. Hey, by the way, so right up until the attack, I mean, as it was launched, only 5 or 6 people knew about it. Only 5 or 6 people knew the plan.
October
the whole
7th.
Plan. Yeah.
Yeah.
So his compartmentalization was effective. I
mean, that is pretty incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. It's not only the Israelis, but the Hamas guys didn't know what was going on. So as they were captured, they couldn't reveal anything. By the way, as they were talking about plans for attack on Israel, they talked about a number of things. One of Sinwar in around 2019, 2020 started to get people looking at knocking down or planting explosives in this tower block in Tel Aviv, close to the Kiryat, which is their version of the Pentagon. There's like a shopping mall there and a lot of tall tower blocks around, and he wanted to get one of these to fall on the Kiryat. He was dissuaded only because it just seemed like impractical they couldn't work out a way to smuggle that many explosives out into Tel Aviv. But when he launched that attack, people say, what did Hamas want? What did they intend? I think it's only one guy whom it really matters what did Hamas intend, and that was him. And he had this apocalyptic vision, in version of change, whereby he would Hezbollah would join in. He was hoping Iran would back them, but he didn't. I don't think he envisioned the state of Israel just disappearing like that. What he wanted to do was just create this dreadful event, and then, because he is an opportunist, start building on opportunities that offered him. And so you notice that when Hezbollah didn't really join in, he didn't waste a lot of time trying to dissuade them. He didn't waste a lot of time via Hania trying to push Iran to do more. He was in a sense, although he would have liked more, content with what was going on. at some point it looked like Hamas might be winning. When he still survived, this was around the early part of this year, Israel was in absolute chaos, still traumatized. And Hamas still had control of the Strip, which, by the way, it does. And but the it is worth saying, aside from Nasrallah, Sinwar's death is infinitely more important than any previous assassination, because more than anyone else, he was a block to a hostage deal,
Right.
and his fanatical dedication to destroying Gaza, which was part of the plan in a sense, he wasn't shared by the rest of Hamas leadership. Um, I'm not saying Hamas is going to cave in or anything like that, but it does make a deal far more likely in the long term. Now, who replaces him? Well, the Iranians, the Iranians have said, interestingly enough, Khaled Mashal, my apologies if I'm mispronouncing his name. The Iranians today in a tweet said that he would be he would probably be replace Sinwar. Now, of course, Iran doesn't necessarily have a say in that, but it's interesting because Mashal was the guy I mentioned who wasn't particularly pro-Iranian. So here's one option. Now, Mashal is in Turkey right now, relatively moderate for a Hamas dude. He's a little like Haniyeh. He achieved fame in a unenviable way in back in 1997 when Mossad tried to kill him in Jordan, and it was a botched assassination attempt. They poisoned him, and then as he's flapping around in hospital, of course, everyone knows. I think they capture a couple of Mossad agents too, and all the poison and everything. And King Hussein, the king of Jordan, says he's furious, and he says, you better fucking give me the antidote now. And Israel did. They they caved in. So that is why Mashal
Wow.
is still alive. Yeah. And at this, by the way, at the same time, after botching that attempt, is when Israel agreed to release Sheikh Ahmed Yassin from prison as kind of a, hey, we're sorry for messing this up. So you see all these consequences, man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, it's a good chance it will be Mashal. In fact, he was when Haniyeh was killed. Oh gosh, when was that? I can't remember. But when he was killed a few months ago,
Yeah.
a lot of people thought that it would be Mashal who replaced him. But there's another black swan out there. Ask me who the black swan is, D.
Who's the Black Swan, Andy?
Mahmoud Sinwar.
His brother.
Ask me if he's related. Yeah, his brother. Okay, so Mahmoud Sinwar, um, whereas Yahya Sinwar, I mean, he can talk to people and he's charismatic. Mahmoud Sinwar is just, he's like a Brooklyn dweller. I mean, knuckle dragging thug.
Yeah.
But a bright guy too. But just he doesn't have Sinwar's charisma. I hate to keep saying that, but he doesn't. Mahmoud was involved, as I mentioned, in the abduction of Shalit back in 2006. The Israelis had tried to kill him 6 times, and in May of 2021, they thought they'd got him. In fact, a lot of people think that he may still be dead, but I think on balance, the indications are that he's still alive. Will he be accepted by Hamas leadership? I don't know. He may have a halo effect from his brother. But I would say it's unlikely that he would take over simply because, the Hamas leadership was always a little, Sinwar made him nervous, right? And his brother's going to make them nervous too. And his brother is an unknown quantity as far as talent. So there you go, D. Sorry.
I have a
Sort of
question.
blab, yeah.
No. In terms of like where Egypt falls here and like the forces in Egypt like that, do provide a lot of stuff to Hamas. Do they have a
Uh,
say? Because I feel like, listen, a Sunni militia Are they really going to want to placate a Shia? I know, even though they are their biggest state sponsor and stuff like that, and they still want to keep them
You mean
happy.
Iran?
Yeah.
Iran, not Egypt. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? Like, wouldn't Egypt, and whether it's the Muslim Brotherhood or whatever else, have like any kind of sway there?
No, no, not Egypt. Egypt is very much, at least the leadership, Sisi, very much anti-Muslim Brotherhood. Remember,
Right. Yeah.
Sisi
Yeah.
overthrew Morsi. Yeah. Now there is, but there is strong Muslim Brotherhood support still within the Egyptian army. All right,
Right.
Sisi hasn't. Strangely enough, Sisi hasn't managed to purge that. But it's not. But I meant Egypt is not an overt or not a supporter of Hamas.
Not
Qatar,
over, not
you know,
overtly.
yeah, Qatar. Well, some might say implicitly by letting the smuggling go on, whatever. But um, Qatar and Iran. Um, I don't know. Iran, as I said, would probably prefer Mashal. Undoubtedly, would prefer Mashal. But I don't know how this will affect the relationships. The main interlocutor with Iran, of course, was Hania, and he's gone. So you might see a weakening of that relationship, which is good news. Overall, I think this bodes well. And if people think I'm crazy for saying, what do you mean overall? A really bad dude is dead. And I agree, a really bad dude. But remember, we've talked before about sometimes you kill someone and it leads to worse consequences. In fact,
Sure.
the history of Israeli and our own assassination attempts are full of that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Al Qaeda in Iraq killed way more people after we killed Zakaria. And when we killed bin Laden, it was an act of revenge, but it did nothing to Al Qaeda.
Yeah. I mean, I hope this brings about at least a hostage deal. But I mean, you got to assume Hamas folks learned from Sinwar and they know the power that hostages hold, like the leverage they have with those. That's the only leverage they really have.
It is, but I don't know. You see, the question is who can make these leadership decisions now? With Hezbollah, we've seen that even after Nasrallah, even after the assassination of its entire leadership, the organization didn't collapse, and that's because the command and control, surprisingly enough, and is distributed across, widely across smaller units that keep functioning.
Yeah.
And also due to there's just strong ideological and religious fervor that drives these organizations. And it's unclear whether, I mean, Hamas is much smaller, less sophisticated, does have strong ideological and religious fervor, but the remainder of its leadership probably less committed perhaps to violence than Hamas. I mean, than Hezbollah. I don't know. That's a bad comparison, but you just don't see that same resolve, I think, in their political leadership. And unless, as I said, Hamas reaches down to someone like Mahmoud Sinwar to replace his brother, then you're going to see a return of kind of the more, God, I don't want to say moderate, but yes,
Right.
more
Yeah.
moderate.
Less, not as
Um,
butchery.
Yeah. So I mean, it could go either way. If Sinwar's dead, this could be a severe blow. It is a severe blow to Hamas, regardless. It could potentially open the door to a hostage deal, and it could potentially signal the beginning of the group's disintegration. Although I doubt that last part, because their hold within Gaza is still very strong. They're still essentially running Gaza now, as we
I
talked
mean,
about.
is extremism ever going to leave Gaza? Let's be honest. It's you could slap a bow on a pig. It's still going to be a pig.
You asked the easiest question to
So
answer.
I know, but it's like the thing at the end
Yeah,
of the
but I
day,
mean,
it's like,
we already answered. I mean, I think we talked about that, right? I
yeah,
mean, if the we jump to this is going to sound really strange for a Marine and a special operations guy to say, but we jump to counterterrorism or counterinsurgency or assassination, um, but perhaps because the UN and other organizations are so ineffective at this. A huge part of all of these military operations should be preemption, not perhaps. Of course, it should be, right. And I would argue that it doesn't matter. You take Gaza, you put it anywhere in the world, similar conditions, you're going to have a terrorist problem.
Right.
You're going to have people. Uh, uh, it's the world's, whatever way you look at it, it's the world's biggest prison. By that I mean, they don't control their own borders, right? So it is a
Yeah.
prison. It's not a political statement. It's, you put people in that environment, low unemployment, and you've got this perennial narrative about, the Nakba, and every day that they're hearing this, they're brought up in this, and now you're going to have. I mean, there isn't a single person in Gaza that hasn't lost people.
Right.
So, like we talked about last time, you, me, or anyone else, we've got a mirror image that these are human beings with the same feelings that we do, and there's going to be a lot of anger. There may be people who say, "Yeah, let's forgive and go on," but there's going to be a lot of young men who've lost families, who want revenge, and yeah, and
And you
that's the problem.
you gotta
Yeah,
assume there's some young, I mean, I guess a bad word to say, young Turk in Gaza that is charismatic that we don't know about that could fill a
yeah,
power vacuum or maybe fracture Hamas. Like who knows what could happen now that because it does seem like Sinwar had a real deal strong grip on Hamas, especially in Gaza.
yeah, exactly. Hey, by the way, I want to apologize to everyone, for everyone who heard me butcher that quote. Okay, here it is. The sentence. So Yahya Sinwar said, it's just a few weeks ago. It's a quote from Imam Ali. There are 2 days in a person's life: the day when death is not your destiny, and the day when death is your destiny. On the first day, no one can harm you. On the second day, no one can save you. So it's a nice summing up of his fatalism, and certainly no one could save him.
Yeah. I think that's it. I mean, unless you have anything else, crazy day,
Yeah,
kind of out of
yeah,
nowhere.
yeah,
Someone's probably buying that, Israeli private a fucking beer tonight, I'd hope.
yeah.
Uh,
Maybe he'll be like that dude who shot Bin Laden. Do you remember
oh
that?
God, yeah,
Have you seen
yeah,
that YouTube video? Who shot? Yeah.
of course.
Who
We've
knows? It'll
we've
be
done
very
a few of
interesting to
those.
see. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'm mad he gets a book deal. I hope he's not a SEAL, right? So I think we're safe from that, at least for a while.
Yeah. Oh, they've in the photographs they've quite rightly blurred all the faces involved. So I
Yeah.
would be surprised. The IDF's got did for I mean, even if when you're out of the IDF, you're still in the reserves, so the reach of military discipline is still there. So probably not the same situation as with I keep forgetting his name. How can I forget the guy who shot Bin
Rob
Laden?
O'Neill.
Rob O'Neill. Yeah.
He didn't shoot he
Um,
shot Bin Laden's dead body. He didn't kill him.
all right. Anyway, in the end, it
Why
doesn't
widely
matter.
reported,
It
right?
doesn't
Yeah.
matter. Yeah, it's like you just happen to be the lucky guy at the point of the spear when all this
I
happened.
mean,
But in
listen,
this case, this is a very different situation. That was a tier 1 unit,
right.
and doing and in a very, I mean, the most powerful, sophisticated nation on earth, all the backing of that. This was a group of Joes, just
Yeah.
not a great, but just wandering in. Here's another building to clear,
Right.
and in they go, and wow, we killed Sinwar. One of them recognized him.
It's
Hey, that looks like Sinwar.
phew. I mean, listen, if I could see them discussing somewhere in Israel, like, hey, let's make this kid famous and have a feel good story, get some good press out of
Yeah,
this, right? Like,
maybe. I don't know. I don't know what the how the I don't we are so. I suppose most of the Western world is the same, isn't it? Everyone's publicity hungry and
yeah.
loves a hero, and yeah. Okay.
All right, guys, we
Well,
appreciate you
there we are,
jumping
man.
in. Yeah, on the hasty live episode of Eyes On. Don't forget to check out Andy Milburn. Andy Milburn's links are all in the description. His book, When the Tempest Gathers, his Substack, his Twitter, everything is in the description. So check him out. You can find him there. Of course, the best way you could help this show and support the show is patreon.com/the team house. Seriously, you get ad-free audio and video, early access, access to our bonus segments, some bonus shows and stuff like that. So, and it helps the channel first and foremost. So, Andy, as always, great job.
Yeah, D, everyone, all the best.